Uh, oh, wait. No, we're streaming. Oh, hello? Oh, boy. Hello?
Hello.
Hold on.
Are you still recording, by the way? I can
am.
stop recording whenever.
I am recording, and I think we're live.
Okay.
We're not seeing yet. We're behind the blue curtain, but OBS crashed Discord somehow. Talk real quick.
Talking.
All right. So we're definitely live on Twitch. Let me check the Google. And then we're live on YouTube. All right. Hit the button. Hello, and welcome to Durst Talk About Games. I'm your co-host, Mango.
And I am your co-host, Buddy.
And today, post-President's Day, I guess we're going to celebrate a national treasure, Paul Rudd. But before we do that, Buddy, I want to tell the folks at home what it is we do on this podcast.
On this podcast, we like to talk about games. Which is convenient because this is our second movie episode in a row. We're number 2. We're 2 for 2 on these.
Yeah, and it's probably going to be more because we got to get through so much Fast and so much Furious.
We have to do quite a lot of Fast and also a good amount of Furious in the next few, weeks. So yeah.
But today we're talking about Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania, which came out last Thursday, I guess. As per usual, we will do a short, non-spoiler, top-level opinion segment, and then we will go into spoiler territory relatively quickly, I imagine. Buddy, what are your top-level thoughts on this movie?
My top-level thoughts on this film are that it's bad. I titled this in the announcement post. I said Ant-Man and the Wasp, the Rick and Morty episode. This is mostly how I felt watching the movie, except it was like unfunny. It was Rick and Morty played dead straight, generally speaking, uninterested in either the scientist at the science that is underpinning a lot of this sci-fi, and also uninterested in the characters who are going on this adventure, right? If I am being charitable, I think there's a lot of imagination on screen, which is good, right? This is something I've praised other movies for, and it definitely falls in that same vein. Aquaman, great example of this, right? Movie I find phenomenal. I love that film, right? And part of what I love about him is stuff like The Fisherman King or The Brine King, right? This massive war between the kaiju that Aquaman is summoning, the Atlantean army that Orm is using to attack, and the Brine King's crab fleet trying to defend their volcanic homeland, right? I think all that stuff is sweet as hell. I think that's great. I think it's cool that there's a desert kingdom in the middle of the Sahara, and they go there, and there's like a little, they have this little Indiana Jones adventure in the middle of it, right? Like, I think that's great. I love this little montage where like Black Manta is like putting his blazers in his helmet and he's in this like crazy underground, there's a lot of imagination, and I could go scene by scene in Ant-Man and the Wasp Quantumania and go, this was cool, this was also cool, this other thing was cool. But at the end of the day, there's just no there. I'm not invested in whatever the drama of the characters seems to be. Really, at the heart of it, I think it is so no thoughts head empty as to be, I don't want you to hurt my daughter. That's it. I don't think there's anything else underpinning, kind of these characters or the conflict on like a thematic level, right? And one truly stellar performance from Jonathan Majors is not enough to elevate his character to something that I find interesting or compelling, kind of in any way. Man, that seems really harsh. I didn't intend to be this harsh, but now that I've said that all out loud, I do agree with all of those things that I said. So I guess I'm being pretty harsh on Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania.
I'm going to disagree. I thought this movie wasn't great, but I thought it was pretty good. I think it's maybe easily like the best Marvel movie of the past couple of years. Um,
Woof.
I
Sure.
not that's not saying much, right? Like the past couple of
Yeah,
years starts with like Black Widow. Like the
yeah,
only one
that's
that
sort of what I'm interested in, actually. I'm bringing up my notes so that I can see what my rankings of these are, because we've been really hard on this phase of Marvel movies.
I think the only one that's a contender is Wakanda Forever, and I think Wakanda Forever is worse. For reasons we discussed
Oh
in
yeah,
the
Wakanda Forever is mid.
um
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. Okay.
but I think I want to agree with you. One, I think the interest in the science underpinning it. This is not a science fiction movie. This is a science fantasy movie. The movie that compares, I think, the most prominently in my mind, um, rather than Rick and Morty, is Star Wars. Right, like the scene in the cafe where they meet not Emperor Palpatine is definitely like the cantina. Right, like I actually, when I saw the trailer, I didn't like do any investigation, but I thought that was like the actor who played Palpatine initially. I didn't realize it was Bill Murray because he looked so much like Palpatine in the Galactic Senate, right?
Oh
And
my
it's
God! Wow, that's actually really insightful. I didn't get those vibes at all, but the moment you said that, I understood it entirely. I think I agree. Maybe the best touchstone would be, uh, yeah, maybe the best touchstone would be, Star Wars.
yeah, no, I mean, I don't think it's perfect at it, right? It's also there's a I think this movie falls a little bit into the trap of like being too much of a piece of the larger Marvel Cinematic Universe than being its own movie. Like, I think I'll agree with you on that, right? Like, I think the idea that Paul Rudd cares very deep, or not Paul Rudd, Ant Man, Scott Lang cares very deeply about his daughter above all else. I think that's yeah, it's not very like that's not very like um unique, but it's like a fairly standard, like fantasy trope, right? Like, or
Sure.
adventure trope, right? It's like I will protect my daughter no matter what the cost. Also, in the moment, um, he doesn't have a lot of context for us as to like why he shouldn't do a thing, right? Other than he's being threatened to. Um, uh, there is some of like there's some of it that I think the okay, so we're still in the no spoiler section, but um there are a handful of missteps, but I do think some of the stuff that make me groan about Marvel movies, like the bathos, I think that was pretty appropriately contained to the comedic relief characters. I don't think it was perfect at that, but I think it was pretty good at like the Modoc is in this movie and he's kind of a joke, but Modoc, as I understand it, is always kind of a joke, right? It's not like anybody's sitting here and being like, no, they did Modoc dirty, right? This is, as I understand it, basically how Modoc functions in the Marvel, or not
Yep.
but in the Marvel universe.
Mhm.
It's kind of a joke character, and I think they kept most of the kind of like nonsense that bothers us otherwise out of the kind of mainline plot. I think it has some issues with stakes, but we'll get into that in the spoiler section. Um, but I think this is a pretty good movie, right? Like, I would say this is like uh numbers wise, like somewhere in like the high 70s, low 80s. So like not like great, not a must watch. If you're a fan of Paul, like I think Paul Rudd did a better job in this movie than he did in the Ant-Man and the Wasp. I don't know if this is better than Ant-Man, but if it feels like he's doing what he does best, which is being like the jokey jokes guy that
Yeah.
like that like is serious when he needs to be. Um, but yeah, I enjoyed the film. And it is not my favorite, but it's relatively high up there, especially considering the recent crop, right? Like if this is an indication of the direction that the series that Marvel films are going in, I think it's good. I think Wakanda Forever was better than anything in the past 2 years before it. I think like the only like I won't even say bright, but like medium star before Wakanda Forever was Far From Home. And that was still pretty flawed. So like I think things are on an upward trajectory. And I'm hopeful that whatever comes next will be good. It seems like they're starting an arc around Jonathan Major's character. I don't know if revealing who he is a spoiler or not, but um, yeah. So
Okay, interesting. I'm sort of on board with some. That's a bad way of putting it. Sort of on board with some of that.
right.
I guess I'm like medium on board with some of that is really how I feel. Because I guess I think I agree, and I want to give um hmm. I guess I want to give a little bit more credit to some of the other like Marvel stuff that has happened being bad in a way, right? I thought of this as a pretty bad movie going experience and I was out of it and I didn't get into the story, but I think that maybe the recent crop of Marvel movies has also been really bad, and that's part of what's like affecting me, right? Like we have Doctor Strange, we have Thor Love and Thunder, we have Spider-Man No Way Home, which I famously really didn't like, even though a lot of other people really liked it. We have Eternals, right? And maybe in a Black Panther Wakanda Forever sort of world, I'm willing to kind of do an and also the framing it a little bit more around Star Wars, I think is also interesting. Because I do think it works better on that level. Um, So I guess I'm willing to be convinced in a certain sense. Um, when it comes to some of this, you know.
Yeah, no, it's totally fair. And like, um my sense is that I will be able to bring you part way along, and I would just like Paul Rudd enough that I'm willing to give it a couple extra points. Um uh but I think that's maybe a good place for us to like mark spoilers. Yeah?
Sure. Yeah.
All right.
Yes.
Spoilers for Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania moving forward. Probably also spoilers for some of the surrounding MCU stuff. Um,
Yep.
before we hit spoilers, just I did watch Loki before the 6 episode miniseries before I went into this. I thought that was pretty good, and it has a little bit of context. Like if you went and watched Quantumania and then you went and watched Loki, I don't think you'd lose a lot. I think that's pretty bi-directional. I think it's slightly better to watch Loki first because like I think that's the intended order. But like, I thought that was a pretty decent piece of media, and that may come up in the discussion. So spoiler warning for that potentially. Um, but yeah, spoilers for Ant-Man and Quantumania. This is your warning. All right, so where do we want to start?
Where do we want to start? That's a good question. What do I think? I guess I want to talk a little bit about just the core stuff that's going on, right? We enter into sort of a world in which Scott Lang is an Avenger. He has been doing some like he's been doing some superhero stuff, it seems like, but mostly he's been like writing a book and
Right,
just kind of like living his happy-go-lucky life in San Francisco where sort of like everybody loves him. But his daughter Cassie is now a teenager. You know, she's doing a little kind of like protesting and stuff like that, getting in trouble with the law, so to speak. And that's where the story starts. um I don't really know where I want to
so
go from there, but it's just like where like this is sort of the state of
the
the
world.
world before they go on their crazy trip to the quantum realm. How do you feel about all that?
I think it's like decent scene setting. Something that I actually do think that's like relevant and interesting is like they kind of very quickly immediately jump into the adventure, right? Like if you've seen the trailer where like it's like it's like I built a telescope to the quantum realm, and then old Wasp is like turn it off right now, and then it immediately sucks him in. That's exactly what happened. I kind of expected there to be like that to be like a weird cut, and then it'd be like some filler in between, but no, it's like normal day, and then they immediately get sucked into the quantum realm, and the only reason they have their suits is because apparently it's Janet and Scott are always wearing their suits, which makes sense. Like that makes that is not an issue for me, right? And they even show that, right? They show Scott showing up to Janet's office and like being they're both just like have their suits all the time, right? That's fair. That makes sense to me, and I'm glad that they don't like spend a ton of time dilly dallying in the front end, right? They establish that Cassie is a rebellious teen and that Scott is being a overprotective father, even though he was once a rebellious youth himself, as we found out in the first Ant-Man movie. And dirty dirt, right? Like kind of like Aquaman, I will say. This movie is not doing any crazy innovations on like the story front, right? Like it is like very much like this is a very kind of standardish story. And there's not really any twists in the plot per se. It's just kind of like weirdness about the characters and weirdness of the world, and that's where you get like your kind of your flavor from. So
yeah,
feels very.
I definitely think I agree with that sort of assessment of things. And to be fair, I actually kind of loved the way that the movie began by just getting into it. This weirdly reminds me quite a lot of what it's like to read like a story in comics. It's rare, I guess I want to say, for there to be a lot of preamble to a lot of stories that crop up in like comic books, right? Most of the time you just get into it. You just get into the thick of it. And that's that, right? And I like that. I like that it doesn't sort of beat around the bush. At the same time, I definitely felt taken aback is maybe what I would say by a lot of the plot developments that I was like, boy, I really wish I could get some like better context to some of this. You know what I mean? Like I really wish that there were moments in the film that were better explained in terms of like motivation and why people were doing certain things and what just the status of the quantum realm itself was kind of like, right? So for instance, we learn that Kang has conquered most of the quantum realm. He has set up this, he has set up this empire. There's this like budding resistance movement. We're introduced to a bunch of characters, but then they're like immediately tossed to the side. We're introduced to another set of characters, immediately gotten rid of. Kang shows up and he goes on this huge, long backstory thing, explaining his backstory. But in all of that, he doesn't actually deal with him creating the current state of affairs of the empire that surrounded them, right? And I just feel like all of that kind of stuff gave me this feeling that like, I just wanted more information, I guess, about that level of the world and how it was operating. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I understand that kind of impulse, I guess, but like I kind of don't feel like I need that, right? Like there's a line, right? They restored enough of the thing that he got his suit back, and that let him take over. And it's kind of like that like that's enough of a handwave for me. It's like, oh yeah, the supervillain did the supervillain villain stuff. That's like the state of the world, right? Like again, to draw the Star Wars comparison, right? It's like we don't find out about how the Empire was formed until like episodes 1, 2, and 3, which are 20 years after the original trilogy, right? Maybe not quite that long, but you know what I mean. So like I don't particularly care that like we don't get that kind of like how Kang came to power, right? Like honestly, that sounds like maybe it's like a a Disney Plus miniseries like Rise of Kang or something. If they decide that that's like a thing to do, I just don't know that I care enough about the mechanics of him coming to power.
Yeah, I guess maybe it's a flaw in the world building because there is a sort of marked difference between introducing me to a sort of society and giving me the tools to understand how it works and operates in such a way that I find that like satisfying, right? So for instance, man, am I really going to make a lot of Aquaman parallels? It's just it's so obvious, I guess. For instance, I have a good understanding of Atlantis immediately, right? or even the Fisher Kingdom immediately, or some of these other sort of locations kind of around the world. There's a lot of world building that just kind of gets done sort of passively through good aesthetics, and art direction, maybe, is what I'm really like complimenting here, right? Like, things I'm thinking about are like, the Ring of Fire death pit where Aquaman and Orm fight for the first time, and Topo the octopus is there and he's drumming, and all of these, uh like all of these people are there, and they're there for the blood sport, and Aquaman and Orm meet underwater in this like little alcove, I guess, that has like armor and stuff, like of like the discarded armor of like other combatants kind of thing. It's like, this is all stuff that gives me like a little bit of like a little bit of line, and I can interpret a lot out from there, right? Even just the Fisherman Kingdom, they describe that kingdom as like scholars and philosophers in some line, right? I think when Orm is there, he's like, I need you guys to go to war. They're like, we don't want to go to war. And he's like, you motherfuckers are cowards, right? Oh, you're up in your ivory towers or whatever. And it's like, and I can get a lot of what I need about that kingdom just from these very sort of like baseline interactions. But I think maybe what's going on with Kang, and his sort of empire and his like faceless goons or whatever, is there's a lack of some of that stuff, and it's very generic in a way. As compared, maybe a good comparison point is actually inside the movie to the Resistance, right? For instance, there's a lot of unique kind of like low level gonzo world building that's just happening inside of this like resistance movement, and the bits that are playing out there, where it's like, okay, you have this guy, he's reading minds, he's doing a thing. You have this warrior woman who's the resistance leader. The dude, my favorite guy, I don't even remember what his name. I think his name was like Stalwart or Solemn or something like that. He had the big lightning
Head.
not lightning. Yeah,
He
like sort
head.
of.
Yeah.
Yeah. He was super cool. And there were like little details, right? Like their buildings were alive. Or the way that they flew in on the final battle was a lot of them are flying on these like massive amoeba creature ship things, right? And it's like, that's neat. That I can kind of like get behind. But I feel like everything that was going on with Kang was so sort of like basic and bare bones, that it didn't really evoke anything else to me outside of sort of the insistence that there is this, great empire that he has like set up, and it's repressive for this variety of reasons. Does that make sense? Does that track?
It tracks, but I think frankly that you're just kind of like missing the point, right? Like, this is like classic Star Wars stuff, right? Like, the villains are all uniform, and they're faceless and maybe immaterial, right? Like, some of these guys just disappear when they're fought, but there's kind of like faceless, authoritarian goons that are the same and unchanging and uncreative and dull and brutalist, right? Like, and I think that's the point, right? That it's a dictatorship run from the top with an iron fist, where everybody under them is identical, and the ragtag resistance is plucky and diverse and interesting, and that's the distinction they're trying to draw between the two. And all of like kind of the normal people in the city are kind of like muted and depressed, except for like, I guess, the rich people in the cafe. And there's not a lot there, but I feel like that's I think that's like a fair criticism, that there's not like a lot of like there's not a lot of insight into the society, but it's also, I don't think, trying to tell that huge of a story about it, right? Like, again, I could see Disney Plus series about the quantum realm at some point, but like, I don't think this movie wants to. I think just wants to show you, there is this world. It is ruled by Kang, who is your stock dictator. And Kang himself is kind of interesting, but like his implementation of it is like, I have an army of faceless goons that do my bidding unquestioningly and can't be reasoned with. And then the resistance is this ragtag plucky group of like different things, and through their cobbled together strength, they will overthrow the evil guy, right? Like that just seems kind of like, again, not super unique, but makes sense to me.
You know, so I guess I think I agree a little bit. I think I agree with that. But here's my thing. When I'm talking about Aquaman, the core story is very straightforward, right? This is a guy, he's not worthy, he goes through a character arc, he becomes worthy and defeats his,
Sure.
defeats his brother, right? Super straightforward stuff, doing this for hundreds of years, right? And that's the part that is okay to sort of be rote in a way, right? But then there's all this other extra like crazy cool stuff that's going on, which is the stuff that we like about the movie. With it sounds to me like we're making that first argument about both the world building to Kang's sort of like threat and empire and to the core story itself. Scott Lang cares about his daughter and he wants to rescue her in a way. Does it make sense? Which is maybe part of why it feels like it's not quite like hitting for me in the right way.
Okay. I see what you're saying. I also think that like there's not a great way to like do the kind of like stock dictator empire without giving it too much character, right? Like it's supposed like Aquaman's kingdom is supposed to be like, is like I guess the difference between like the the Imperial God, like in 40K terms, right? Or like maybe in Warhammer Warhammer terms, like there's between like, Karl Franz and like the humans versus like the ogres or something, right? Like you have to have like kind of like stock standard normal thing, and that feels like what Kang's supposed to be to me. But I understand your criticism.
I don't know. It's tough. I think also part of it is just like really looking at it through that one